Now at Verizon, we have some big news for your peace of mind. For all our customers, existing and new, we're locking in low prices for 3 years guaranteed on My Plan and My Home. That's future you peace of mind. And everyone can save on a brand new phone on My Plan when you trade in any phone from one of our top brands. That's new phone peace of mind. Because at Verizon, whether you're already a customer or you're just joining us, we got you. Visit Verizon today. Price guarantee applies to then current base monthly rate. Additional terms and conditions apply for all offers.
Instacart is on a mission to have you not leave the couch this basketball season. Because between the pre-game rituals and the post-game interviews, it can be difficult to find time for everything else. So let Instacart take care of your game day snacks or weekly restocks and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Because we hear it's bad luck to be hungry on game day. So download the Instacart app today and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply for 3 orders in 14 days, excludes restaurants.
Welcome to episode number 269 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Claire, Liam Huddock, Robin Lloyd Davies, Stacey Radakovich, Susu Bean, Kelsey Story, Michaela Fierce, Pav Late, Kate Patrikowski, Katrina Busquet, Heather Ciccone, Albin, Caked Up Cafe, and Laura G. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week. Our film review is The Rule of Jenny Penn. The Rule of Jenny Penn was released in 2024. It has 6.3 out of 10 on IMDb and 71% on Rotten Tomatoes. Arrogant judge Stefan Mortensen suffers a near-fatal stroke, leaving him partially paralysed and confined to a retirement home. Resistant to the staff and distant from his friendly roommate, Mortensen soon clashes with seemingly gentle resident Dave Creeley, who secretly terrorises the home with a sadistic game called The Rule of Jenny Penn, while wielding his dementia doll as an instrument of cruelty. What begins as childish torment quickly escalates into far more sinister and disturbing incidents. When Mortensen's pleas to the staff go unanswered, he takes it upon himself to put an end to Creeley's reign of terror. I feel like fundamentally this film is going to be divisive, right? I think some people are going to enjoy. I don't even know if enjoy is the right word for this film. Some people will hate it. Some people will enjoy it. I'm using the term loosely. But I will say one thing. The first thing that I wrote in my likes column about this film was that sometimes a horror film brings you the perfect villain. And honestly, John Lithgow in this film is perfect as a bad guy. He is one of the most hateable villains that I've seen in a really long time. And I would watch it again just for his performance. I hated his character so much. And there was no nuance in that hatred. I just hated him. I couldn't wait. And I was desperate to see him getting his comeuppance. I wanted to see his downfall deeply, desperately. There was nothing else in the world in that moment that I wanted more. He was terrifying. He was dark. He was conniving. He was just evil and sly. But I'm not talking like he's not going around murdering people in the film. Like, you know, the things that he is doing is proportionate to the environment that they're in. So you're not looking at him and he's not like this, like, you know, vindictive murderer who's decapitating people and hiding bodies. And it's not that kind of villain. But the quiet level of mental torment that he is able to perpetrate, oh my word, he was such a good villain. But this film really disturbed me in general, you know. It really sat with me, and there was nothing at all supernatural about it. So if you're looking for a horror film that's about ghosts, poltergeists, demons, whatever, this is not it. This is not a horror film in that regard. There's nothing ghostly about it. There's nothing paranormal about it. And somehow, for me, I think that makes it worse, because this is a human horror. And that is often much scarier than watching something about the paranormal. You know, when you watch a really scary paranormal film, you can turn on some cartoons afterwards and kind of wash away the fear. But you don't really get that option with this film. It just sort of sits in your brain. And the judge is an amazing character as well. So the judge was played by Jeffrey Rush. So you've got two kind of amazing, strong, powerful older men in these roles, you know, and my God, did they play well against each other. But the judge is a great character, right? And he is arrogant, he is unlikable, and he is a very powerful man. And he has this stroke that is life-changing, and he ends up in this care home. And I suppose in a way, part of the horror is about power and being stripped of that power and suddenly being a really powerful man who's in control of his surroundings and all of that being taken away from you. And one of the things that I found difficult watching it was how the older people in the care home were often infantilized by the workers. And I found it really frustrating to watch. And obviously the characters are often really frustrated by that too. And I guess there's a horror here in how a medical incident can change your life so dramatically and can strip you of so much, of how dementia can, you know, destroy worlds and lives and families. And it's also that horror of, what do you do when nobody believes what is happening to you? How do you deal with that? I mean, that is horrific. And we know, obviously, we often see stories about bullying and stuff, kids being tormented in schools and kids being tormented in primary school and secondary school, and how awful that is. And of course it is awful, but it doesn't end after school. Like, bullying continues throughout life. And the fact that this is in a care home and everybody seems so helpless, and this man is just doing all these awful things because he can, and it's really disturbing to watch. And in terms of dislikes, there's a lot to dislike about this film. But I think the goal of it is for it to be a difficult watch, right? But it genuinely does feel like long and repetitive, and I would say monotonous at times. But I did wonder if that was meant to be representative of life for some people in a nursing home. There's also a possibility that I'm just intellectualizing it too much and it was just the product of bad writing, that it actually was just repetitive and monotonous. I saw a lot of reviews that were like, this was just really boring to watch. And in terms of it being a horror film, like, there isn't that jump scare, big tension kind of feeling around it. So it is a slow burn for definite. And I think it was also really difficult to watch in terms of elder abuse. Watching these grown men and women being terrorized for, you know, nearly 2 hours, it's really difficult to watch. It's really difficult to engage with at times. And like I said, the infantilization of some of the older people in this care home is also a really difficult thing to watch. Now, it's not necessarily a negative thing, because it is something that can happen in care homes. And can I just say that if you are somebody who works in a care home, or if you've got a loved one in a care home, I'm not saying that all care homes abuse the people that are residents there. And I'm not saying that care homes are not good places for a lot of people, right? In this instance, in this film, the people in the care home are going through something that is really difficult, and the staff members aren't, you know, listening to their concerns. Okay, so this is specific to this particular care home. And the reality is that this film is way more miserable than terrifying, right? So yes, you're watching in fear because you're frightened of what's going to happen to the characters, and, you know, scary things do happen to the characters. But I came away from it feeling depressed. Like, I it was great, and it was a really good film, and the performances were amazing, but I came away being like, well, that was fucking miserable, wasn't it? And I think there is like a lack of exposition at times for the characters, right? So in particular, John Lithgow's character, Dave, you don't actually learn that much about him. And I did read a lot of reviews that said they found that really disappointing. And they sort of, you know, they wanted to know why he was the way that he was, and they wanted to know more about his background. But I kind of felt like in real life, you don't always know why people are bastards. Sometimes people are just not nice people, and you don't always know why. So it didn't really bother me, but it might be something that bothers other people when they're watching it. And I also saw a lot of people had problems with, like, what would happen in reality, you know, where people were like, there'd be CCTV and this wouldn't happen and he wouldn't be able to get away with it and he'd be caught immediately, you know, so on and so forth. And I think when you're watching something that is billed as a horror film, there is a point where you have to put your disbelief aside. But it's like I said when I was watching the film Trap, when you're setting a film in the real world, you have to be more mindful of the things that would happen in real life, and that does make this a little bit difficult to watch at times. You do end up thinking, how is he getting away with this? Honestly. Is it a good film? Yes. Is it an enjoyable film? No. I think I'm going to give it 4 stars. And I think the 4 stars is because of the strength of the performances by Geoffrey Rush and John Lithgow. Like, I could watch those two all day. And those two in that battle of wills, it was just so good to watch them. So it's 4 stars for The Rule of Jenny Penn.
Strap in. You're in the race with F1 TV Premium. See what the race director sees with custom multi-view. Watch every jaw-dropping moment in live 4K UHD. Across up to 6 screens, uninterrupted. Experience ultimate live immersion with F1 TV Premium. Available on selected devices.
Which brings us to our story this week. Now, our story this week does not involve a man terrorising people using a terrifying baby doll puppet. No. You'll probably be glad to hear it. But our story today covers the mysterious place of Alderley Edge. Let's get into it. Just south of the village of Alderley Edge in Cheshire, England, lies the Edge. The village, sharing the same name, clings to the steep sandstone cliffside just beside the Cheshire Plains. It's a sleepy village, a quiet village, filled with quaint little shops and old houses. But the Edge itself, the Edge is where the true heart of Alderley lives. And if legends are to be believed, it's where it sleeps too. But for those of you on the lookout for adventure, there is nothing gentle or sleepy about the dramatic landscape of Alderley Edge. Jutting out of the rolling English countryside are bright splashes of red sandstone and a cliff that is just as sure to drop you to your death if you wander too far, as it is to give you breathtaking views of Cheshire. On a good day, one could even see as far as the city of Manchester, or even the Pennines. And on any day of the week, you could also see a lot more than that. Alderley Edge is a place steeped in legend. It's hard to say which one came first, if people started going there because of the mystical stories and properties hidden within the land, or if thousands of years of history, of comings and goings, and of belief have imbued the countryside with power. Because that's what it has. Seemingly since the dawn of mankind, people have flocked to Alderley, and they have come there for all sorts of reasons. One of them was a man named John Evans, a man who would become known as the Hermit of Alderley Edge. But the truth was that John was not your average hermit. He was well educated, well spoken, and always well dressed. He was born the son of a postal clerk in Salford during the early 1880s, and worked for the local railway for most of his life. He went from clerk to civil engineer, but by 1915, at the age of only 33, John was forced to retire. Some say he had severe health problems. Some say he had a fiancée who died during the sinking of the Titanic and whose loss sent John into a deep depression. Either way, in 1915, John's doctor suggested that he move somewhere where he could live among the pines. Pines are not easy to come by in Alderley, but I'll come back to that a bit later, because all we need to know for now is that John followed his doctor's advice and moved out into the countryside. He settled into a log cabin on the Edge. But again, this isn't your typical hermit story. John didn't live in a raggedy old hut or a damp cave. He lived in style. The log cabin was part of a local family's estate and was even named after a safe house in Switzerland, Burghley Hut. It cost John a pretty penny to rent the place, and he kept it in pristine condition. He spruced it up, cultivated the garden, and was even known to teach others about botany and geology as a way of giving back to the community. But John was still a bit of a character. He was, after all, still a hermit. Yes, he would teach youngsters and help out where he could, but he drew the line at women. He didn't like having them around and was even known to shoo them off his property. And there is, of course, the mystery surrounding his death. John died suddenly at the age of 50. Some say by poison, some say from his poor health, some say from a curse. Much of his life, just like the cabin he once lived in, fell into ruin and then faded away. But you can still find traces of him in Alderley Edge. His name has melted into part of the legend that surrounds the land, and his work can be found in the stone terraces of his garden and the small remains of a tunnel that he used to store his food. But the truth is that John is just one of the many faces drawn to Alderley Edge. Buried deep in the rock face are veins of copper ore. Perhaps not as important today, but to our ancestors this metal was absolutely vital. There was nothing quite as important to those who lived during the Bronze Age, and the evidence of that can be found all over the Edge. Sprawling underground in the mines are many tunnels, and out of one of those particular tunnels came a small wooden shovel. To some it may not be much to look at, but this shovel was groundbreaking to the archaeological community. That shovel put mankind in those caves, mining for ore all the way back in 1750 BC. That makes the mines at Alderley Edge the oldest prehistoric mining site in Britain. Our ancestors mined there, the Romans mined there. We mined there up until 1926, when the mines were finally closed down. And now visitors can go down there themselves to see traces of the people who have come before us. It seems like Alderley Edge, despite the rough and dangerous cliff, has always belonged to the people. And where people have lived for a long time, there is always magic. Magic is at the core of Alderley Edge. Magic, history and legend. All three of these come together to forge the heart of a land that still draws people to it like a moth to the flame. People often come in search of something that very few have ever found. If the legend is to be believed, there is only one person who knows of its exact location. The man tasked with protecting it for all eternity. The story goes that one day a farmer from the local village of Mobberley was crossing Alderley Edge on his way to market. He had with him one of his most prized possessions, a white mare that was sure to fetch him a good price. But just as he crossed over the cliff, the farmer was approached by an old man. This mysterious figure, dressed all in white, had seemingly appeared right out of the countryside to make the farmer an offer. He wanted to buy the farmer's white mare, but that only added fuel to the farmer's proverbial fire. He hadn't even made it to the marketplace yet, and people were already after his mare. He was sure to make a lot of money if he could only hold out and make it there first. The farmer turned down the old man's offer, but just as he walked past him, the old man left him with a warning. The farmer would make it to market, but he wouldn't get what he was looking for. Instead, the old man told him, many people would come to admire the farmer's horse, but none of them would buy it. The only offer the farmer would ever get on his mare would be the one the old man had already made himself. The farmer brushed off the old man's words, but the old man told him that he would be waiting in the forest for the farmer to return in the evening after the market all the same. And of course, things turned out exactly as the old man had predicted. The farmer stood in the market the rest of the day, watching all of the other lesser horses sell for good money. But no one offered to buy his mare. Defeated, the farmer crossed the cliff that evening on his way home, only to be met again by the old man. The old man repeated his offer to buy the farmer's mare, and this time the farmer accepted. The old man led the farmer to the nearby rock face, which he struck with his staff to reveal a secret opening sealed off with iron gates. The prized white mare whinnied and fought a little on the reins, and the farmer wasn't much braver himself. "Do not fear," the old man, who the farmer now realised was actually a wizard, told him. "Come and look upon a sight that no mortal has looked upon." At that point, the farmer didn't know what else to do other than follow the wizard down into the cave in front of them. They walked for seemingly an age until the cave then opened up into a massive cavern. There, in the darkness, the farmer saw over 100 knights, dressed all in shining silver armour, sleeping in the cave. Beside each one laid a white mare, sleeping just like her master. All but one knight had a steed, and so the wizard turned to the farmer and explained, "With your horse, these men are now complete." He then guided the farmer's mare to lie down and sleep next to the knight without a horse. These knights and horses would sleep until their country needed them, and then, and only then, would they jump up and spring into action to defend the nation. The wizard and the farmer left the knights and the horses to their slumber and moved on to another cavern lined with riches. Gold, jewels, and treasures piled up high in the glittering cave, and the wizard told the farmer to take anything that he could carry as payment for his horse. The farmer filled his pockets and followed the wizard out of the cave. When he finally got to the other side of the iron gates, the farmer then heard a thud and turned. The gates were gone, and in their place was the face of the stone cliff. Many have tried to find the iron gates of legend. Some want to meet the wizard, some want to see the knights, but many come after the cave of riches. No one has ever been able to find the entrance to the caves, but some have pinned it down to a vague location somewhere between what's known as Stormy Point and Holy Well. If there are any of you listeners out there willing to go searching for it for yourselves. And I'm sure, as some of you have already pieced together, the story about the sleeping knights waiting to defend their country is similar to many legends, especially ones like Merlin, King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. But there's something different about the legends surrounding Alderley, something a little more grounded. Wherever King Arthur supposedly sleeps is still a mystery, but wherever these knights sleep is somewhere in Alderley Edge. All anyone has to do is find them and the legend would prove true. Many local establishments are named after the tale, and many locals themselves still believe in the mystical cave and the men sleeping inside it. As late as World War II, locals were known to joke about the hour of need being upon Britain, and that instead of white horses, they hoped the knights would spring out of the cave in white tanks. The first known publication of the legend came in 1884 and claimed to have been collected from local oral tradition that could be traced back to 1776. Centuries later, Alan Garner wrote about Alderley Edge in his children's book The Weird Stone of Brisingamen, a story that talks about a wizard in a mine. And Alan Garner himself is deeply tied to the more modern take on the legend, not through his own work or the fact that he is a local, but through generations of his family. Out in the forest of Alderley is a small cliff, and in the small cliff is a small trough. A spring dating back all the way to the Neolithic period fills that trough with fresh water, and even though the spring is only ever as strong as a slight trickle, the trough is always full. And the locals have an explanation to explain why the trough never empties. Magic. According to legend, a wizard uses his power to keep the spring flowing and the trough full, and his liking can be found on the rock face itself. There, right above the trough, is a stone carving of an older, bearded man. Underneath him, carved into the stone reads the message, "Drink of this and take thy fill, for the water falls by the wizard's will." Seemingly magical indeed, and certainly proof of the wizard's existence. If it weren't for the rumour about Alan Garner's great-great-grandfather. If speculation is to be believed, Alan's great-great-grandfather was the stonemason and supposedly the one to carve the mysterious face and inscription above the well. But now we can finally talk about the forests of Alderley Edge itself. I'm sure some of you have already pieced it together, but the alder tree, not pines, as John Evans' story would have you believe, are what make up a huge portion of the trees in Alderley Edge. And the alder tree is sacred. Long before Christianity came to the country, the Druids believed in the magical properties of the alder. They worshipped it, used it in mystical ceremonies, and of course, inside the alder tree is where the fairy folk are said to live. Traces of the power of alder trees can be found all across the country and all across our common history. The Welsh favoured it too, and in their 14th century poem called The Battle of the Trees, it is the alder who leads the others into battle. And so the story goes, the alder tree is still used in modern day witchcraft, which could explain why the forests around Alderley Edge have long been believed to belong to the witches. According to legend, witches gather in the forest on Halloween to perform rituals and dance naked among the trees. It's said that they have always come, but an unfavourable newspaper article that was published about them in the 1960s drove the coven out of town. Many now come to visit a forest that was once sacred to witches and to visit the nearby Druid Stone Circle that allegedly holds significant amounts of mystical power. But as Alan Garner would have you believe, the Druid Stone Circle of Alderley Edge is not quite like the others. He claims that the circle, just like the Wizard's Well and its inscription, was another long-lasting gift from his great-great-grandfather and was never a Druid site at all. Whether that is true or not, and whether Alan's long-lost relative was simply enjoying adding to the mysterious legend of Alderley Edge, a little too much, or playing with us, we know that people have been coming to Alderley for thousands of years, and we also know that they were coming there for ceremonial purposes. In the nearby village of Wilmslow, there was once a large peat bog. Now modern-day buildings sit on top of what had once been marshland, but every now and then history raises her weary head and reminds us of where we all came from. In 1983, 2 peat workers out at Lindo Moss noticed what seemed to be a peat-covered football on the tracks on its way to the shredder. They picked it up to have a closer look, thinking that it may even be something like a dinosaur egg, but it most definitely was not. They wiped away the peat only to find that they were looking at a human head with one eye and some hair still attached to it. It turned out that the woman buried out in Lindo Moss had been put there over 2,000 years ago, around 210 AD. She was probably part of the ritual sacrifice practiced by people at the time, and she definitely wasn't alone. The following year, only 250 metres away from where the Lindo woman had been found, the very same worker who'd found her head saw a piece of wood on the way to the shredder. He picked it up and threw it as a joke to one of his colleagues, only to find out later that it was actually a human foot. The foot belonged to another peat burial dating from around the same period the Lindo woman had been sacrificed in the bog. Pete Marsh, as he was being called then, had been strangled, beaten around the head, and had had his throat cut before being cast out into the marshes in a ritualistic sacrifice. Pete Marsh, the Lindo man, or Pete Bog as he was also called, turned out to be the best preserved bog body to be found in the entire country. His story was covered internationally, and his discovery was hailed as one of the most important archaeological finds of the 1980s. So we've gone a bit more fairy tale folkloric for today, okay? Alderley Edge has been on my list for quite some time, And while we're not going to dwell on it, things currently aren't great for a lot of people. So I thought maybe something a bit more akin to a fairy tale, a bit more folkloric, a bit lighter might be more appropriate for today. And I would recommend that if you're listening to this to Google image Alderley Edge. Oh, what a beautiful place. It is so picturesque. It is gorgeous. You've got this big, beautiful cliff, this cliff top, and then looking out over green countryside. It's lush. I mean, it just looks magical. And just from an aesthetic perspective, you can see how a place like this has grown some amazing legends and folklore and stories. And going back to the beginning, right, with our hermit, John Evans, what a life. And it was fashionable for a time period in the UK, in England anyway, to have a hermit living on your land. And when I say that, it is exactly how it sounds. It was fashionable within richer communities to have a little shack on your land that a hermit lived in. If they were some sort of artist, that was even better. If they were a painter or a poet or a writer or a bit eccentric, that was really cool to have living on your land. And if I'm going to be a hermit living on someone's land, I want to be John Evans. I want to be in a stylish log cabin. I don't want to be living in a hut. I actually would quite like to be a bougie hermit. Thank you very much. Pretty much the only thing that I would request in my hut would be a roll top bath and piping hot water all of the time. That's all I want. I don't need anything else. I just want roll top bath, piping hot water, and I'm going to be happy. But it does give you an idea of how amazing Alderley Edge is, that doctors were like, you need to go to Alderley Edge and live in the wilderness. It'll help to cure you. And there is, of course, the idea that I also firmly believe in, that lots of psychologists and therapists and psychotherapists, etc., will talk about, that if you are, particularly if you're grieving, to go out into nature is really, really healing. To go out into big nature, like on a hike up a mountain, to the seaside, to the woodlands, somewhere where you feel small, is actually can be really healing for people. So I kind of think good on John Evans's doctor. That period of time in the early 1900s to be like, look, I know you're really struggling mentally, say, for example, if it is because of his fiancée passing away. I know you're really struggling mentally. Do you know what will do wonders for you? Big nature. Big nature will make you feel a lot better. And of course, if you've got a hermit who is living in a bougie hut that dies, you know, relatively young in his 50s, people are going to be like whispering about how that happened, you know? And I think that when you've got somewhere like Alderley Edge that is so rich in history, you are going to end up with stories about magic and wonder and, like, you know, to be Britain's oldest prehistoric mine, first of all, and that's magical. Like the fact that people back in 1750 BC were knocking around, you know, digging in the mountains looking for copper ore, that's incredible. And of course, when a landscape delivers this magical, wonderful substance, this material that helps people so much, of course, when that is happening, you're going to end up with stories about druids and wizards and witchcraft. And I always think with stories like this, like, what did the people in 1750 BC, what did the Bronze Age people think about the mining of the mountains? What were the stories that they told? Because they would have had their own folklore and stories about the mountains. They would have had their own worries and fears about creatures that lived in the mountains. And, you know, we understand the world through storytelling. That's how we understand things. So what were their stories about the mountains? Can you even imagine? And I also love the fact that you've got these stories about wizards, you know, these stories about knights that are behind a secret door in the mountain, and, you know, they'll wake up when the country needs them and whatever. And it's all very Lord of the Rings, like, and very The Hobbit. There's a lot of great imagery that is really reminiscent of Lord of the Rings, like the trees going to war, the trees going to battle, and the secret door in the rock face that a wizard has to open at a particular time. Like, that is all very Lord of the Rings. And also The Hobbit, for all of you nitpickers out there. And I kind of love the idea that maybe it was Alan Garner's great-great-grandfather who just fabricated loads of these legends, being like, you know, I did the carving at the Wizard's Well where everyone was like, this water comes from a wizard, and, you know, that's why the trough is never empty. He's just like, lol, it's not actually a wizard, I just liked carving faces and things. And, you know, creating a faux druid stone circle. I kind of love it because you're also building up stories around a place that are important to local people and stories that get passed on from generation to generation. And it's kind of, I love it, it's kind of harmless, you know. I think fundamentally we need these magic places, you know. We need these places that are seen to be mystical and beautiful, and we look at them and we think, oh, maybe there are knights asleep in the mountains. Maybe there is a secret entrance. Maybe there are caves that are filled with gold and jewels, and maybe witches really do go here, you know, at Halloween during Samhain to do dances, and because it's all just lovely, and it's kind of warm, cozy folklore. You know, maybe the trees are alive in a more human way, and maybe they did go to war. And look, maybe Alan Garner's great-great-grandfather wasn't just taking the piss and making people think there were all that, you know, there were druid stones and faces of wizards carved into stones. Maybe that stuff really did happen. And look, right, there is nothing I love more than a bog body. If you don't know anything about bog bodies, by all means, just this is your Easter Sunday rabbit hole, bog bodies. They are so interesting. In Ireland, there are lots of peat bogs, so there are therefore lots of bog bodies and bog artefacts that have been found that are essentially perfectly preserved. It's to do with the peat and the moisture that it allows these bodies to be, you know, pretty much perfectly mummified and preserved. It's amazing. Bog bodies are amazing. Also, if you're a butter fan, I love butter. Things I didn't think I'd say today. If you are a butter fan and you want to know about bog butter, I would suggest looking it up. Essentially, in Ireland and in Scotland, they have found loads of bog butter, which is basically lumps of butter that has been buried in peat bogs, and they think it's probably for you know, preserving it, and either the person who was preserving it forgot that it was there or died, and the bog butter gets preserved, and they dig it up and find it, and they're like, oh, it's bog butter. So like I said, this comes out on Easter Sunday. If you want to sit and go down a rabbit hole, bog bodies and bog butter, that's what you want to be looking up. You may be able to hear my voice as well that I have been ill this week, so I have not been on tip-top form. Apologies if my sick voice, my Phoebe voice has been grating to listen to, but it is also partly the reason why today's episode has been less horrific and more folkloric. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website, reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
G'day, America. It's Tony and Ryan from the Tony and Ryan podcast from Down Under.
Today we want to talk to you about Boost Mobile, the newest 5G network in the country.
These guys are no longer the prepaid wireless company you might remember. They've invested billions into building their own 5G towers across America, transforming the carrier into America's fourth major network alongside the other big dogs.
Yep, they're challenging the competitors by working harder and smarter, like this amazing new network they've literally built.
The Boost Mobile network, together with their roaming partners, covers 99% of the US population, but 5G speed's not available in all areas.
Yep, they have blazing fast internet and plans for all the latest devices. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com.